On today's show, JB Bickerstaff is out as head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Chris Manning and I are going to sit down and discuss if it was the right call or not and who could be his successor on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On. How you doing? I'm Evan Dammarrell. Joining me on my right, technical left on presentation of the show is my soon-to-be retired co-host, Chris Manning. And, maybe we'll be a friend of the show down the line too. But right now, Chris, friend of the program, JB Bickerstaff, is out as head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. How do you feel about it?
Had to be done. It's unfortunate, but it had to be done. There's no way around this. I think the moment you got to the end of the season and the season ends and you get now they tell the stories about Kobe Altman having to go to him about minutes and talking to, and Donovan Mitchell not trusting him and the players questioning him, all of that stuff. It's over, right? I think that at that point, to me, it was done. I don't think he always did the best job in figuring out solutions on the offensive end in particular. Now, is all the blame his fault? I don't think so. But I do think that this was the move. I think, yes, they made linear progress. All of that stuff is true. I do not think that anything else other than this could have been done. This was the move that had to be made if the Cleveland Cavaliers were going to try to evolve this team, evolve this roster. It's unfortunate, but I think this had to get.
I agree. I think from a locker room standpoint, like you said, it's the now they tell us stories like Kobe Altman confronting Bickerstaff about playing Mitchell too much and keeping his rotations too tight, and I think just playing Mitchell too much in general. I think that's something that you and I have just kind of pointed out and may have played a part in Mitchell missing time, and at least according to The Athletic is why Mitchell didn't voluntarily sign up to Team USA, and probably played a part in him not being selected for Team USA in Paris this upcoming Summer Olympic. But yeah, it's a muddy situation. I do think it's interesting just because we're about a week removed as of recording this when the Cavs season ended, and Brian Windhorst and a couple others were making a little bit of like a push at least to say like the Cavs weren't. They were carefully deciding Bickerstaff's fate because, like, let's be frank, the coaching market may not be like, the most robust in comparative years, just in terms of maybe what Cleveland needs, because it's fair to question, go ahead.
I just disagree with that, though. I do. The first name you heard from Woj, for instance, is Kenny Atkinson. Kenny Atkinson, as a guy with a track record of development in Brooklyn, with a more robust skill set of running good a modern NBA offense in JB Bickerstaff is available. That's one name.
I agree.
Yeah, David Adelman is out there. Like even if you wanted to go the same exact kind of head coach, Frank Vogel has a better offensive track record than JB Bickerstaff. James Borrego has a better offensive track record than I think JB Bickerstaff does. I know we'll talk about him as well. I think the idea that the coaching market is not like overloaded with candidates is a fallacy. I think there are a lot of good candidates out there. Coaching candidates I would much rather have than JB Bickerstaff.
Okay. I think I'm willing to test the waters on it just because like the Cavs have to be mindful of like, yeah, Bickerstaff more or less has lost the locker room. Donovan Mitchell was frustrated with him. Some players were frustrated with like the lack of consistent playing time and minutes. I know it personally just from conversations I've had too. Like that's true. And I think like, the fact that the offense just was not there 2 postseasons in a row against it was 100%. Okay, let's give the ball to Donovan Mitchell and hope Donovan Mitchell can just do everything for us, which against Orlando, despite the knee issues. And then we saw what happened in the second round. Eventually his body just gave out because couldn't physically do it anymore. And I think if you had a coach who isn't, rigid about his offensive system, he's willing to be flexible and adaptable. And I think that's like where James Borrego becomes a little bit more attractive to me. I think, obviously the Hornets situation notwithstanding, that was a toxic situation, but he did maximize his roster despite how bad it was. But like they were one of the top offensive teams when he was coaching Charlotte in his last season. And then the Pelicans went from like 22nd to a top 10 offense overall under Borrego too, which is just predicated more on just like heavier 3-point shooting and kind of trying unconventional things, which the Cavs are certainly comfortable doing to begin with. So maybe it's a little bit of an extension of that. But Overall, yeah, I think this is the right call just because if you are gearing yourself up, if you're Cleveland, to make sure that all your ducks are in a row. So when you offer Donovan Mitchell that 4-year maximum contract extension, when we know the conversation's been going on forever, but the legal tampering period begins before like agency officially starts and all those deals are officially done. Like you want to make sure all your ducks in a row and you did everything in your power to keep Donovan Mitchell in the fold for you, and that's just kind of all you really have to approach this with. And not even if it's Mitchell, let's say Mitchell declines and the Cavs end up trading him. This is also just a move to kind of maybe shock the team a little bit and also just maybe reset the tone in the locker room because it wasn't just Mitchell that was reported to be frustrated. It was multiple players and really can't sustain that if the guys are starting to tune the coach out and then it turns into a situation where the players are just winning in spite of the coach. And that's never a recipe for success no matter what you do.
Can I ask you a very simple question, Evan? Because I don't feel like I have a good gauge on your opinion on this. I think mine's pretty clear. I don't think JB Bickerstaff was a good enough coach. Do you think JB Bickerstaff was a good enough coach to continue?
To continue, no. He was a good enough coach to get them to this position. I think he was a good enough coach to bring stability and normalcy to the position after having to deal with Larry Drew and John Beilein back to back like that and just kind of really sucking the soul out of things. You can say culture or whatever, and maybe it's not as rock solid when there's a bunch of now they tell us stories coming out in the wake of losing to Boston, but he at least brought normalcy to the position. He brought stability. I think he maximized and showed some actual bona fides this season, especially when the Cavs were not great, but he squeezed blood out of a stone that may not have been there to begin with, but there's a lot of limitations with him, and I think those limitations just really can cost you in the playoffs, and they cost him during the regular season. Like I think about that game against Chicago where it went to over double overtime, and he shortened his rotation to like 6 or 7 players throughout the second half in the overtime period, and like just ran Donovan Mitchell into the ground. Yeah, I think he is good enough to get them to where they are at now. I think you can be satisfied with the fact that he was able to get out of the first round and take a win off Boston, who could very well win the championship. Like, yeah, it's a good thing to put your feather in your cap in, but the limitations outweigh what he's able to give you at this point, and it's at this weird crossroad where the Cavs aren't, young and developing. They are ready to take off the training wheels, be adults, and actually not be playoff hopefuls, but like legitimate playoff contenders and a team that could play for the conference finals or find a way or a path to the NBA finals, depend on the coaching structure and then just obviously how the rest of this offseason goes.
Yeah, and look, I don't think as an offensive coach is always in step with the modern NBA. I don't think the Cavs coaching staff in general is that way, but you're the head coach. You bear responsibility for that. Yep. You just do. When you're JB Bickerstaff and you assembled the staff, you bring in Luke Walton, you have whomever, the buck stops with you. And like I think the ideas do emanate from him. And yes, the roster, he doesn't assemble the roster, but like the ideas are him, and he could never figure out the puzzle with all the pieces on there. And I think you hear people around the league talk about this, pundits, people in the league, whatever. There is excitement about this roster that I think there is an idea that someone who's a different coach, a better coach, could do more with this roster and get more out of it in these. I think there's an opportunity here. Like, I do think that this is the job that a better coach could get more out of. And I think that's why you have to do this. I think frankly, there was a case to do this last year. I think there would have been it would have been a malpractice to not do it now. I think it would have been an absolute. I don't know how, on top of just it not making any sense from like a basketball standpoint, I don't know how they would have sold it to the fans. I don't know how they would have sold it to the players.
Okay.
I don't know how you could have done anything with it. What?
I thought you were talking about last year at first. Like, I don't know how they did, like what they did.
I mean, I don't think
running it back twice would be.
Yeah, you can't.
Incredibly.
You barely could do it once.
Staggering.
You barely did it once.
He was almost fired in November, reportedly. So like, it wouldn't even lasted that long. And maybe it was the coaching situation then. Maybe a player stuck his neck out to kind of save JB from getting X, but. He's no longer the head coach. I think we can talk a little bit more just maybe about his flaws and limitations and just obviously kind of like view that through the lens of some of the possible candidates. We can talk about the first timers or I guess you can call them guys who have former experience. I don't really like the term retread because it's so negative. But yeah, we'll talk about that more in a second. But first, got to take a quick break to get you locked on LinkedIn. As I had mentioned before, today's episode of Locked On is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are right for their role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tool to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of over 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates to pick from, and it's so easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses have a qualified candidate within 24 hours on LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They have even launched a feature that helps you write descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. So just post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we are back with more Locked On Cavs, talking about the wake of JB Bickerstaff no longer being the head coach. Weirdly enough, the fourth or fifth most longest tenured coach in the franchise's history, but he's like the 23rd or 24th coach in the franchise's history. So gives you some perspective on how up and down things have been. But he, I guess, was just about as long as Ty Lue off the top of my head. But I got to ask you guys, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that is programmed every day to bring the biggest stories without all the screaming. I mean, just listen to this show. Locked On Sports Today brings you all the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which, of course, is your team every day. So, we talked a little bit of his limitations, but defensively, do you think this Cavs team was pretty solid under Bickerstaff? And you have to wonder, was a lot of that adding Evan Mobley into the mix and, Jared Allen just finding himself a little bit within this flow? Because there's a lot of players that questions for me, but we'll shift to the offense first. And for me, Chris, it's just when looking at this team and how it's presently constructed, the lack of a cohesive offensive identity or a set list of plays. Like, I understand the Cavs more or less freelance on offense. Sure, they ran a lot of heavy pick and roll, but they didn't mix it up or stagger things up a lot. And sometimes they ran some pretty interesting plays or ATOs and things like that, but it wasn't consistent. It didn't have that pulse. And whether they kept Bickerstaff and brought in an offensive assistant to run the offense, or they go with another mind, but when looking at this coaching market, I understand the appeal for Kenny Atkinson or even a guy like Borrego. Is it just clear, going into this coaching search, the Cavs should be focused on offense more than defense, just because they have the personnel just to kind of take care of the defenses already?
Yeah, I mean, I think even if number one, this roster is. I think it's not even that though. I think it's not even that you already have the defense figured out. It's that this roster is set to evolve. This roster is going to change. This is going to be you read anyone who knows anything or says they know anything about this team, and I think everyone is forecasting change. If this was a weather report, there's change, right? Evan Mobley is probably going to be the starting center next year. One of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell is probably not going to be in the team next year. Okay, the team's going to look different. It's going to evolve. You need a coach who I think is in step with what modern teams do, what modern offense do, who's innovative, who's going to be creative, who is more adaptable with their offensive sets in particular. But I think it's a coach who shows more adaptability. I don't think JB is always the most adaptive coach. I think one of his big weaknesses is that guy does not particularly adapt well. It takes him time. Yes, he will figure stuff out. Yes, I think in these playoffs, he at times showed a little more adaptability than he did the year before. But it was still way too little. It was still not nearly enough as what you would need. Evan, I understand you're trying to be fair to him, but he just wasn't good enough. He just wasn't.
No, and, I made a face when he said offensive adaptability in the playoffs. I read it somewhere, but Bickerstaff it felt approach the postseason like it was a regular season matchup where the Cavs more or less had their pieces in place. Maybe they make some small adjustments based on the opponent, but they were not playing with pace. They're not playing with space. You saw minutes just going to guys that probably you should be reducing, giving minutes to more guys, and just plugging and playing options to see what does or doesn't work, or have a game plan in place where you're not kind of scrambling to figure out these adjustments or fixes. But I think that's it played a huge part in that series against Orlando being a 7-game slugfest, or the series against Boston being, okay, Donovan has to just go absolutely nuclear in game 2 to get us a win, and the rest of the team front runs behind it because Boston, intelligently adjusts for what Donovan Mitchell is doing, despite Mitchell just firing away on the perimeter. And that's just not a lot of creativity there. And I think, like you said, like the Cavs have the pieces to be creative. Like there's a lot of things you could do with Evan Mobley because he has such a unique in the sense where like it is the prototypical archetype of a modern big man, but the Cavs aren't accentuating those modern big man traits with the passing or, just kind of getting creative with it too. Like sometimes you see those big to big plays they ran, but like it's just like small bursts of it where like they're kind of dipping their toes in the water instead of just diving in fully to just leaning on the stuff that works and just maximizing those things and forcing the defense to adjust to you instead of the Cavs adjusting to how the opposing team is attacking them offensively.
I also don't think it's like that simple. I think the development of other skills in these guys is not there. Like Evan Mobley, it took like us seeing him at a different position to feel like we understood how we developed. I don't think Darius Garland has meaningfully developed as an offensive player since Donovan Mitchell got to Cleveland. But that is like on the whole organization, but that also falls on JB Bickerstaff. And if you're Darius Garland, that falls on you too. But like you have to evolve your guys and get them to do other stuff within your offense and you creatively use these different guys. Like these guys should not be one-note players that you can only use in one specific way, and they look bad if they're not playing one specific way. That is not how modern basketball is. Modern basketball is interchangeable. It is flexible. It is creative. It comes up with different solutions. It is about finding advantages on the backside of pick and rolls. It is about running sets to get guys in motion and come off screens and like create mismatches and find opportunities. Like it is so much more than what the Cavs did. And there's not like, except for when Donovan Mitchell was cooking, just straight up cooking, there is very little in the Cavs playoff offense in 2 seasons with JB Bickerstaff that I would call good. And I don't think he deserves credit for that. I think Donovan Mitchell deserves credit for that. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing here?
The only time I'd really give credit for the offense, and it was just because of the lack of personnel, was when Mobley and Garland went down this season. They were playing faster, they're playing with pace, and they're playing with just like a presence. And it frustrated me to no end that they abandoned that identity entirely once Mobley and Garland came back. Sure, you want them to adjust and kind of get into the flow of things, but you shouldn't completely tear down what was working for you that season. Of course, Donovan Mitchell being the head of the snake, but that was the frustrating thing. But I think the player development thing is a big part of it too. They had 3 top 5 picks on this roster in Mobley, Garland, and Okoro. Like Okoro, I don't know what he is still. I know he's very good defensively, but like offensively, like there's moments he kind of had it. He was shooting it with like, zero hesitation against the Celtics, but like it's still not consistent. Evan Mobley, the injury played a part in it, and I think this, the series against Boston and the last 3 games against Orlando in the playoffs do give you reason to be optimistic about him playing the 5 long term for Cleveland, but I do wonder, like, what was the plan with his development from, like, his rookie season to now? Like, sure, you encouraged him to play more to his defensive strengths, and he was very comfortable with not having to be ball dominant. I think that's also, also part of being a product of the situation because you have so many players that also need shots as well. We're a team who has a top 3 or 4 pick like the Cavs did. When they got Mobley, they would probably be picking from the ground up, and, like, Mobley would be the center of it. But regardless, like, I don't know what the focus was for player development. You saw the reports of how players were frustrated that, like, during shoot around and practices, there was a lot of questions of what did we just do for the last hour to 2 hours. Like, it feels like there's not a lot of maximizing opportunities. And sure, I'm trying to be a bit fair to Bickerstaff, I guess, just because, like, I think, like, he's a good coach for what he is, but he has clear limitations, and those flaws and limitations come back to bite you and also can only take you so far before, like, they kind of outweigh whatever good that he's bringing to the table. But we also just never really saw that growth and development or change from him throughout his time as a head coach, because I think of him as the same head coach as he was basically the day he took over from John Beilein, and that is a problem. Or I remember the media day when you and I were sitting next to each other, and I asked Bickerstaff, like, hey, are you guys going to, like, you have 2 bigs on this roster. That kind of dictates the fact that, like, you need to shoot more threes to give them space. And he's like, well, the NBA or fans and people in media have fetishized the 3-pointer. That's always made me raise an eyebrow. And it took them 2, 3 years from that to say like, okay, we got to start shooting more threes when they should have been doing that to begin with. And yeah, I think he was more or less the same coach when he took over for Bayline. Yeah, he maybe have grown and adapted a little bit just because that's what you do when you have a job experience. You do learn and grow from it. But again, I just think the limitations are clearly there, and it kind of was going to hold the Cavs back if they brought him back next season, and it would probably see very similar results in the postseason, depending on like the overall result and just what the Cavs had on the court. Like I think he saw, I don't think you 45 to 50 wins most, but like you're going to be either limping into the playoffs or you're going to be on a backslide exiting the All-Star break, and you're not going to be at a good place when you hit the postseason.
And again, if your players are questioning what you're doing, it's over. It's over.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's over. It's absolutely over. And I think that's just the tricky part is like as soon as you lose the locker room, it's just, it's an endless cycle there. I mean, at least like John Bayline had I guess I don't foresight, but retired. He resigned because he lost the locker room much quicker than Bickerstaff did. But either way, we are going to talk more about coaching candidates, maybe on a more positive vein. Look at some of the good options out of the market, because I do agree with Chris's take that people may not think it's that robust, but I do think there are some solid choices. I think you're teeing me up on that in the first segment, but we got to take a quick break for ads. Today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, big and small. When we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and to figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just complete a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get what's bothering you off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp. HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, we're back for these last 10 minutes. Let's do a nice little 10-minute jolt. Chris, out of the coaching candidates available, if you were running this entire coaching search for the Cavs and wanted to get them off the carousel, who would be the guy that you picked to be the next head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers?
Sam Cassell, and it's not even a question to me. Like this is like the easiest one of all time to me. Like
the only caveat is you risk the Lakers could take him between now and when the Cavs are able to get
but like your question was not, do I have to worry about the Lakers taking him? It's, do I get to pick
fair enough. Yeah, pick who you want, and I agree it's Sam Cassell, but dive into it a little bit. I want to hear your reasons and see if we have the same ones.
He, to me, is like the Ty Lue, cut from the Ty Lue cloth. He will have your players' respect. While accounts like he's been working behind the scenes for a long time. Does he have the reputation? I think among the league is like the David Adelman offensive guy or whatever. I don't know. It doesn't seem that way, but I trust him to come in and just be really good. Like every account of him seems like he's just going to be awesome, and especially if you here's the key to this whole thing, though, Evan. It was what I will add to this. The Cavs have to just like let whoever their new coaches pick, if not a whole new staff, like 90% of a whole new staff. They have good at some guys who I think are smart, good at their job on their staff. Like, I don't think Luke Walton needs to be back next year. I don't think like that Greg Buckner necessarily needs to be back next year. Just go get new ideas, refresh the whole thing, bring all kinds of new ideas, and don't do a half measure here. You've gotten here via half measures. Go do like a real robust turnover here and actually turn this over. That could involve a bunch of different things. So, and I think some of that would involve all new assistant coaches on top of your coach. That will matter as well. But as far as that coach, Sam Cassell would be, maybe number one on my list. I don't know if I haven't like thought, okay, exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, but he's the first name that has come to mind for me.
Yeah, he's a name that I just keep circling back to because he is a former player. He has 15 years. I didn't realize this. He's been coaching. He's been 15 years, but he's been coaching for nearly just as long. Worked under Doc, so there's those parallels, like you said, with Ty Lue when Doc was with the Clippers, and then and then he followed Doc to the Sixers, and then joined Boston's coaching staff this last season. And I think he just has a lot of credibility because he has a lot of experience. I think there is an interesting parallel if you're able to keep Darius. If you elect not to trade Darius Garland, he is represented by Clutch, so maybe there is a little bit of inner workings there that could, satisfy Darius Garland's desire to be traded right away. But I think more than anything, it's just the connection with the players. And I think if you're looking to like really sell Donovan Mitchell on it, a guy Sam Cassell is super close with on the Celtics are Donovan Mitchell's like two best friends in the NBA, and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And I'm sure like Mitchell's keeping tabs on the situation, but
okay, I like. Okay, let's not like getting into hypothetical. Getting one of the J. That's like 8 steps.
You're not. No, you're not getting one of the J's, but friends talk, and I'm sure Donovan's asked like, "Yo, what's it like being coached by Sam?" Because I'm sure he's going to be a guy that the Cavs bring up in conversations, of course, and they're going to run it by Donovan, even though Donovan hasn't signed an extension or anything, and he'll just turn to his friends on the Celtics, and then they'll say what he could be a good part of, and it is tricky just because. But he's been on every single like position on the bench, according to Joe Mazzulla, at least. And he has been the role player. He's been the guy who's been a leader. He's a guy who is able to connect with players 1 through 15. I think that's very helpful. And I think that's just, he can be a catalyst, but it is just, fair to question, like, does he bring more of a Doc Rivers approach? Does he have his own identity like Ty Lue did? But I think it is a smart hire. And I wonder, if the Cavs go after him, like, is that like the right call? Yeah, I think it would be. But also, like, he could also just think like, oh, I could also just go back to Boston and be Mazzulla's lead assistant for a year and then reevaluate the market if he feels like this isn't for him either. But so if it's not Mazzulla, and I'm thinking about it, like Kenny Atkinson makes a ton of sense. He made a very strong case about it already. Atkinson has a ton of experience in Brooklyn. He's been coaching the Warriors forever. You do have to wonder because he probably smartly turned down the Hornets job in 2022. He is very particular about what coaching opportunities he has or has to deal with. And I think in Cleveland, it's a lot more attractive than having to coach the Hornets years ago. But on Atkinson, I keep going back to James Borrego. I think, despite how bad his record is, he doesn't have a winning record. He improved the Hornets by 10 wins every season he was there. I think what he did at the Pelicans this year is noteworthy. Hypothetically speaking, if the Cavs were to trade for Brady,
say specifically, what did he do for people that don't know? What did he do with the Pelicans?
With the Pelicans, I kind of mentioned it the first segment. So last season, the Pelicans were a lower third teams in terms of offense. They're like 21st or 22nd in offensive rating, which for those who don't know, that is just how many points you hypothetically can score per 100 possessions. And so the Pelicans were, a little sub-average, and I think, injuries did play a part in that, and they were healthier this year. But Borrego came in clearly just like the offensive tactician, with Willie Green just handling a lot of the defensive stuff and a lot of just, the rotations and final decisions, of course. But, like, Borrego improved Pelicans from 21-22 to a top 10 offense this season. Again, I think health did help with that a lot, but there's a lot more of a three-point attack. There's a lot of ball movement, and that's something he really approached with Charlotte. And I think the fact that the Hornets had, in his last season there, had one of the top offenses in the league, but with Ish Smith and Isaiah Thomas running point because LaMelo Ball was hurt all year, says a lot. And I think it would. He
also
really
got the only great LaMelo Ball season out of LaMelo Ball for what it's worth.
Yeah, but like the issue is just like the Hornets started to tune him out as well, and you could maybe fall into that pitfall again where if things don't click right away, do the Cavs start to tune this guy out too? Because players talk, and I'm sure like people maybe know already, but he'd be an interesting hire for the Cavs. And if they wanted to go full Donovan Mitchell, like, hey Donovan, we're here to make you happy. One, Antonio Lang could be interesting if they wanted to just stay within that former Cavs coach, and if they didn't want to branch out too far from, I guess, the Bickerstaff hierarchy. But more than that, I think if the Cavs hired Johnny Bryant as their next head coach, like, that's just a clear, hey Don, we're gonna go hire your guy from Utah that was your personal player development coach, and we're gonna hand him the keys to this entire team, and pry away Tom Thibodeau's top assistant on top of that.
Yeah, I think like the sum order of a 5 you would be Atkinson, Cassell.
Oh, you put Atkinson over Cassell?
No, I'm saying I'd some order. I'm not saying an exact order.
Okay.
I'm not doing. An exact top 5 is not something I'm ready to do. I would go in some order: Cassell, Atkinson, Borrego, Micah Nori, and Chris Quinn from Miami.
I would go Atkinson, Cassell, Borrego, Adelman from Denver, just because I think there is
Oh
some
yeah,
legitimate-
Adelman should be in there instead of Nori. Let's swap that out.
Nori's a good pick too. I think.
Yeah, but like Adelman is like the offensive guy. Is like if they hire a defensive first
Yeah,
coach, and just like that's a mistake. Adelman
Yeah,
is a really good.
Adelman is
mind.
the offensive mind behind what the Nuggets have been doing, and he's very much in like that Jordi Fernandez school of thought.
Well, as much as one guy can be when they have Nikola Jokic, that's the caveat.
That is the caveat, but like he does have some unique offensive concepts and ideas clearly because they're playing an offense entirely through a big man, and he has schemed that up around that plan. And I think, helpful if you're trying to develop Evan Mobley on a certain path. But I think Adelman is in no certain order, and then probably just to round it out, it would either be Chris Quinn, just because like he's been coaching for so long, and I think he just is a guy who makes a lot of sense as the next head coach. Or I'm going to go left field on this one. I think Alex Jensen could be a guy too, just because like did help develop Gobert in Utah. He has experience coaching with Mitchell with the Jazz. He has been coaching around Luka and Kyrie a little bit in Dallas the last few years. And also the Cavs have familiarity because he coached the Charge many moons ago, back when they were in Canton. So like there's a little bit of just a nice little PR push there, and also just familiarity between Altman and Jensen too. And also was a guy who was a candidate post Larry Drew as well. So well, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, but people who poo-poo the market, it's not that big of a stink as people are saying, but there are some interesting guys the Cavs could look, and hopefully they don't go completely out of left field and do like Tom Izzo or something like that, or Rick Pitino. But
I mean, I would ask people this too. If you're like one of the people that's like, I don't like this coaching market, ask yourself this before you say that. Were you that excited about JB Bickerstaff? Ask yourself that.
No, absolutely. That, or people may not have a full understanding of what a head coach actually does. It is the staff around them too. And I agree with your take from the very beginning of this. No matter who the Cavs bring in, they have to empower that coach to have full control of his staff and make sure like they're able to put their pieces in place to make sure that they're able to maximize success. And maybe there's some holdovers from Bickerstaff's coaching staff, but like I don't see like, Greg Buckner, Luke Walton, and so on, roaming the sidelines or, sitting on the bench next to whomever is the next head coach. There's going to be some new fresher faces no matter what. But until then, I'm Evan. That's Chris. This has been Locked On Cavs. We have talked about the end of the John Blair Bickerstaff era, friend of the program, and we'll be back with more for Chris's actual last episode as co-host of Locked On Cavs. But until then, I'm Evan. That's Chris. See you guys soon.